Good evening, everyone. Very nice to share with you. This, in a certain sense, will be our last sharing here at the center. We will have the retreat next week, but this is our last time here. This is a very special evening, and Devi and I will speak only briefly because we're going to have a ceremony when we finish, and we will be ordaining two new acharyas, Dr. Amar and Blazy, and we will also be giving the Nayaswami vows to Suvarna. And because of that, we thought that it would be good to talk from the Gita on the subject of inner renunciation. So I'll read this sloka. This is from chapter 5, sloka 26. Renunciates who are without desire or anger, controlled in mind, and self-realized, are inwardly free, whether living in this world or merged in the infinite. So, as I say, we will speak on renunciation. Renunciation is not so much a place or a thing as it is a direction, a life direction. And in a sense, every time we practice Kriya Yoga, or every time we practice energization, or Hong Sa, or meditation, we're becoming more and more true renunciates, inner renunciates. Because outer renunciation is not the essence of it at all. It's inner renunciation. Master kind of laughingly said, talking about someone coming and saying, "Oh, I've lost my job, I've lost my house, my wife has left me, my children are no longer interested in me. I think I'll become a renunciate." And he said, that's no renunciation. Renunciation is inwardly. It's the voluntary offering up of those false attractions that Maya spins a web, making us think that we will be happy, we will be filled with fulfillment and joy and happiness if only we had this. We drove to our monastery yesterday, and we were coming back along the road, and we could see a hoarding about every 50 feet. And every one of them wanted to convince everyone driving down that road that we couldn't possibly be happy unless we took a flat in this building, or unless we had this diamond necklace, or unless we had these clothes that we could purchase. So constantly the world is trying, Maya in the world is trying to convince us that our happiness lies in attaining something outside of ourselves. Now, renunciation is simply to begin to withdraw from that false drama, that false promise. As Master said, the only promise that Maya will ever keep is that it never keeps its promises. Because we can never find our fulfillment outwardly. And so inner renunciation is the gradual realization that our happiness lies not in things, but in states of consciousness. Ultimately, only an inward and uplifted consciousness is the only thing we will find ultimately fulfilling. And so by beginning to break that hypnotism and withdraw the energy, we become renunciates. And that is a long and gradual process. And so even though Suvarna will take the vows, and you'll hear the vows, which sound like we should have absolutely no ego desires left anymore. We should always live in a state of God consciousness. Well, it's true, we should. But that doesn't mean that we can't become a renunciate before we achieve that final state. Because if we don't take on the, let's call it the direction or the vow of some kind of renunciation, and I don't mean that all of us need to take outward vows. You know, a mother with a young child can be much more of a renunciate than someone wearing orange clothing or blue clothing, because that inner state of not living for oneself, doing one's duty, and yet doing one's dharma without any thought of reward for oneself, that's more inner renunciation. Swamiji, when he wrote the rule, the Nayaswami order, and wrote the booklet that contains the vows, he said that he wanted to change the model of what renunciation was. And that's in part why we wear blue instead of orange. He said, orange is the depiction of a fire into which you throw all of your possessions. And so I shouldn't have this, I offer it to the fire. I don't want that, I offer it to the fire. Or I shouldn't want that, I offer it to the fire. And so on. And so you offer into the fire. He said that's the old form of renunciation, and it's the form of renunciation that is world-denying. He said, but he wanted a new form of renunciation, not world-denying, samadhi-affirming. And so instead of the orange robe or the ochre robe, we wear a blue robe. Why? Because blue is the color of is one of the major colors of the spiritual eye. And so samadhi affirming means that we're trying to take all of that energy that has been committed to the false promise that I will find happiness and fulfillment if only I have these things, or this relationship, or something outward outside of myself. If we return that energy inward, and in each meditation, in each breath, if we lift that energy up and we bring that prana, that life force, into the spine and bring it up to the spiritual eye and offer it into the spiritual eye. The yellow is the astral plane, the blue is the causal plane, and the white star in the center is the God consciousness that lies beyond all outward manifestation. And so by samadhi affirming renunciation, we offer our life force into that. And then, if that process can take place, then who are the real renunciates? Who are the ones that are really renouncing those things which will lead to fulfillment? It's the worldly people. That's why Master put in the autobiography I've forgotten which saint it was now. Badri Mahashai. He had given up great wealth, and he said, who's the real renunciate to give up a few paltry jewels and possessions for a life of samadhi? I'm the one who is getting things. The other people are the renunciates. And so it's just that gradual letting go of delusion, not the things, the delusion and attachment to things. And as that process continues, you may need to have things because we need to function in this world, but you aren't attached. One time, someone had given him a very expensive overcoat and a very expensive hat. And he went to a restaurant, and at the cloakroom, he took off his overcoat and his hat, and he got a little kind of a number, and then after the meal he came to reclaim the coat and hat, and the person went and looked. They brought the coat. They said, "Oh, sir, we're extremely sorry. We can't seem to find the hat. It's disappeared." And Master said, "That's all right." Inwardly he said, "Mother, couldn't you have taken that expensive coat too?" So the possessions were just an annoyance that he had to, useful. You have to have a coat in cold weather. But he wasn't at all attached, and certainly not attached to the fact that it was expensive. And so that withdrawal of energy and offering it up to God, that's the true renunciation. All the rest is just stuff that helps us achieve that state of consciousness.
Well, I'll also share a few words with everyone tonight. And like Jyotish, I want to thank all of you for we were in Pune earlier on, when we first arrived in India, and now we're close to the end of our journey here. And we want to thank you for your many, many kindnesses and the beautiful spirit. But most of all, we want to thank you for, I shouldn't say thank you, we want to recognize the beautiful devotion and dedication to God and Guru that you are creating here. For it's like creating a divine palace that people can come to and say, "Oh, now I understand what it means to be a devotee. Now I understand what it means to love God." And so we want to really acknowledge the beautiful seva and the beautiful bhav spirit that we have found here in Pune. It's been very, very inwardly fulfilling for us to be here. So on this topic, I'll just speak briefly, but Swami told a very interesting story, which you may not have heard, that there was a great sadhu, a great renunciate, who lived far away from the cities of men, and he lived in a cave and had renounced all the world and meditated many hours a day and had accrued great powers. And one day he had the feeling, I'm going to go and maybe I'll wander into the nearby village. And so on his journey, he sat to meditate one morning, and there was a crow that was on a tree. And you know the story. And it was disturbing him. It was cawing so loud, and he became angry. "This isn't right. I'm a great sadhu. Look at all I have done." And with a glance of anger, he looked at that crow, and it just burst into flame. And then he continued on his journey, and he became thirsty, and he saw a little humble abode, and he thought, I will go there and ask for some water. As it turned out, it was the home of a butcher, which is not, someone of his stature, but he was thirsty, so he knocked on the door. And the wife inside, she didn't come right away. And he knocked again, and she didn't come. And then finally he knocked starting to get angry. "I am a great sadhu. I am a great renunciate. Why isn't the people coming to serve my needs?" And he heard a voice call, and she said, "Be patient, sir. I'm serving my husband his dinner. Then I will come and bring you some water. I am not your crow. Don't get angry." And he was so shocked, because here was a humble woman, the wife of a butcher, serving her husband, but she had greater spiritual development than he did, because she was living a life not of how important I am, how spiritual I am, look what I'm doing for God, but she was simply serving in a spirit of self-forgetfulness, and serving God in her husband. And so for all of us to remember that it isn't what it looks like on the outside, but as Master has said to us, God watches the heart. He sees every single act of self-offering, of devotion, of humility, things that you think go unnoticed, but nothing is unnoticed in God's eyes. A friend of mine asked me earlier today, what was Swami Kriyananda like in the early days of Ananda? And I hadn't really, the answer came, and I hadn't thought about it so much before. But when he was first starting Ananda, he was a young man. He was in his 40s, very strong. But in those, liked to go skiing and worked, my goodness, he worked night and day. But in those days, he was very, very focused. He was building something for his guru. And he didn't mix much with those of us in the ashram. He didn't socialize. He was focused on writing and lecturing and traveling to do classes and everything it took to build Ananda. And it was not a small thing. But then, as time went by, and he began to see, oh, it really is getting established. It really is going to, this service to my guru will become a beautiful portal through which people can come to the spiritual path. He began to change a bit, and he became more, I wouldn't say social, that isn't the right word, but he took the role more of our personal teacher. In the beginning, he was more removed and aloof, but then he shifted, and he cared about the needs of each one. I could tell you so many stories of little moments that people have shared with me, how in their time of need, Swami would call them or just give them a little bit of advice. But he began more of that period of his life. But then towards the end, it was beautiful to see, because his health, he had given everything to God. There wasn't a drop of blood left. There wasn't a breath left. There wasn't a thought left. There wasn't a creative expression left that he hadn't offered to God. And he was just like a little feather. And to my mind, that was a perfect demonstration of a life of inner renunciation, totally fixed on serving the guru, then on serving others, and then nothing was left but just his love of his guru. And he would give a talk, maybe some of you saw him at the end. He could barely speak of his guru without crying. He would just say his guru's name, and his eyes would fill with tears. And his life became very, very simple. Just, I've given you everything. And ultimately, renunciation is not about what we give up. I give up this possession, I give up that, whatever it may be. Ultimately, renunciation is how much we love God more than we love ourselves. And that is the perfect state of inner renunciation, and that's what pleases God. So we see that spirit here in so many of you. None of us are important in God's eyes, and yet each one of us is precious in God's eyes. And let's always remember that and return even a little drop of his love a drop of the ocean of his love for us with a drop of our love. And little by little, that transformation that we saw in Swamiji, where there's nothing left but the love of God and Guru. And this is the true renunciate.